This is The Edge.
This is a very cool episode. J Elvis Weinstein, sidekick, co-host, frequent contributor, however you want to term it.
Whatever the hell I am.
He's a lovable family member, and he has a new comedy album, also a new film. So we're going to get into all of that today.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I'm impressive.
You stay where you are, J Elvis. You listening, please stay where you are. There's so many ways to support this show. Thank you for all of you who've dropped emails our way, edgewithmarkthompson at gmail.com. You can support us financially because we are teetering, J Elvis, to be honest.
I can feel it.
We're operating in the red, and I don't mind a little red, but a lot of red is a little rough. You can send us a contribution if you want. I mean, look, I'm not having to pressure people. I don't like begging. You know, this is my least favorite part of the program.
You know, it's even less uncomfortable is having people go to the Amazon link.
Oh, thank you. You're right. That's more,
you're
right.
They pay nothing out of their pocket, but we get a little kickback from Amazon.
Thank you. If you're going to buy with Amazon anyway.
I never see any.
You don't. Well, I don't, nor do I. I mean, I'm just trying to, again, stay afloat. So it's the same Amazon you would normally get, but we get a little piece, as Josh says, of whatever you spend. So it's a little kickback. So that's a good way to support the show without ever having to actually reach into your pocket to do it. And then, of course, there's a PayPal link if you want to send us something. So with all of that said, for all the ways you support us, thank you. And now, let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Time for some politics. We check in with someone who's forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. He's Michael Shure, everyone.
Thank you. Hello. How are you? Good to be here. Man, it's great to see all these faces here, Mark. It's been a while.
Well, this is a crowd that loves their Michael Shure. I'm glad we could deliver some today. There is so much going on. California's on fire or out of power to avoid fire.
Yeah.
Let's put that to the side for a moment, and let's get into some national issues because it's been a busy week that way as well.
Yeah, there are no longer not busy weeks.
Yeah, it's a ravenous news cycle. Let me start with the Syria thing.
Okay.
And then we can move on. We'll get to the president's taxes and some other stuff. But the Syria decision by Donald Trump, which was made after a conversation with Erdogan, to pull out U.S. troops from, and there are not a lot of U.S. troops
No,
there.
they are. But however many there were, they were doing the job.
Right. And the relationship with the Kurds was a critical one to sort of support what was a...
And there was a quid pro quo to that relationship because the Kurds had been supportive of the United States as well. I mean, many would say, they had no choice but to be, but they didn't have to be, and they were.
And they did the heavy lifting fighting ISIS.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And you did. The Kurds and you.
I did a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, you did.
No, it's true. Thank you for recognizing that. Not many people acknowledge it.
People forget that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm doing a lot of work against ISIS every day.
Right. Can we just have the audience acknowledge that for a second?
How
because
about a little
it's
people,
important to me.
How about my work?
Mark Thompson.
My work, people. My work! The removal, the sudden removal, the sudden decision and then removal of those troops led to an immediate incursion by the Turks.
Of course it did. And that's what was presumed to happen the moment that the removal was to occur. And here's the thing. Not going into the detail of what happened and what it meant, but what this means politically and why this is the sort of manifestation of a lot of people's fears about this president particularly, is that he just did it on a whim. And that was the fear that a lot of people had in 2015 when he was running for president. Look, this guy's impulsive. He would just do something, and other people were saying, no, he would never do that. Well, he just did it, right? And a lot of the Republicans who said that he never would do it are now saying, wait a second, maybe I was wrong. They're not always saying that, but they're saying this was wrong, right? This was the wrong thing for a president to have done and not consult with the national security people on Capitol Hill at the very least. That said, it's happened now, and people are reassessing, his foreign policy and how this could have been allowed to happen. And it's not just Democrats reassessing it or assessing it.
And so that implies, look, his GOP coalition might be fracturing as a result of this specific decision?
I'm loath to say that because every time you think it happens or is about to happen, it hasn't happened. This, though, there are people on the record and vocally expressing their dismay with this decision and their anger over it rather than kind of dancing around it and saying, well, I wish he wouldn't have done that, but right? This is actual, decrying what happened. So, yeah, and I don't know that it's fractured, but with every day that passes, it becomes more permissible for Republicans to go against the president. It won't be permissible always if the president can correct his poll numbers. But as long as they are bad, and as long as he is that impeachment becomes more popular, or the inquiry itself, and as long as his negatives stay where they are or plummet even further, then it becomes easier for Republicans. I mean, they eat their own, these politicians, not just Republicans. So when you see one of your own wounded, that's an opportunity for others. These people have stuck with him far longer than I thought they would, because at home there's a popularity to the guy. As soon as that popularity wanes, there's no currency in really sort of cozying up to him anymore. It becomes more complicated.
I remember one of the most annoying things about the Bill Clinton administration was they seemed to always run up the flagpole whatever decision they were thinking about to see how it was blowing politically.
Right.
And as a result, you don't really have decisions made in any kind of sort of unifying strategy, apart from the fact that you want it to be politically successful. And I feel as though when you talk about the GOP and even Democrats, when it came, for example, to impeachment and, having to reach sort of a critical mass on it politically, you realize that, wow, a lot of decisions are just made on, are we going to lose the base over this? Or the principles, the principles of governing and the principles of right and wrong kind of seem to take a back seat if they're in the car at all.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and it's really curious because Washington doesn't work that way. It works much more like the Bill Clinton years, when people would run things up the flagpole, where you'd throw something out and see how popular it was, see how the media treated it most specifically. It doesn't matter to Donald Trump how the media treats anything, because he just goes after the media, as he did in Minneapolis at his rally. So if he's changed the way things operate, people are starting to realize, some of them, I liked it better before he was there.
It's so wild, by the way, you mentioned the rally, that, he pulls troops out of Syria. There's a Turkish incursion that involves the Kurds, and you've seen this refugee issue that's going to be a huge one. There's going to be a refugee crisis as a result of this.
Yeah, and after the rally, he dismissed that as Europe's problem, not ours.
They're going to go back to Europe.
Yeah. Oh, so that's okay. If it's a refugee problem, that they're going to go back to Europe, doesn't matter to us.
Well, if a lot of these ISIS, quote, fighters, or those with allegiances to ISIS who are being guarded in these huge prison camps by the Kurds, and we're talking about upwards of 10,000 people, they're going to be released. So in the middle of all of this that's going on, I mean, this is a new hot zone that he's created, right? With this impulsive, as you suggested, decision. And by all manner of computing, it was certainly impulsive and sudden.
Right.
He still goes to the rally less than 24 hours later, or within the next day.
Right. And calls Hunter Biden a loser, and calls Ilhan Omar an anti-Semite, and rallies people to say, or he didn't, but his son, lock him up about Joe Biden. And he went after Nancy Pelosi, went after the mayor of Minneapolis, who took on the president before this rally, saying, why does our city need to pay for this rally? I mean, you saw what happened in El Paso when he went to that rally. They're still in debt, the city of El Paso, from covering the security for this rally. It's not a presidential appearance. And the notion, too, that, it used to be a president would show up and give a speech, and there would be some protesters, or there wouldn't be. The protesters would be outside, the invited guests would be there, and there would be something of substance said, and that would be the end of it. Now it's a terrible event when the president comes to town.
And then in the same breath that all of this is going on, to get back to Trump, quote, policy, and I just don't know that there's no coherent policy here in so many instances internationally, except that clearly Trump and the administration is smaller and smaller every hour, and people are leaving, and people are in temporary positions, having, in a sense, gotten around the confirmation process that way. They're ruled by the money. I mean, Trump is, for example, in the Saudi Arabia situation that was just announced in the last day. We're going to send troops to Saudi Arabia. Now, what is the relationship that the U.S. has with Saudi Arabia? It's
petroleum.
Right.
Yeah, it's a petroleum-based friendship. Listen, Tim Alberta wrote on this. He also has a great book called Carnage, about the Republican Party and what's happened since Trump. And he, one of the things I remember him saying in 2015 is that Donald Trump's running for president not to win, but to boost his business. And, and I keep thinking about that, because it's true. That's what he did. And Tim wasn't, the only person to see that and say it. But he didn't really think he was going to win. The people around him didn't, but they thought, oh, my God, this is going to lift his profile to a degree where his brand would have been improved. Now, of course, his brand has suffered since he's become president, but it is always about money for him. It's always about either stiffing somebody, making money legitimately, but making a lot of it, or trying to find a way out of it, or an opportunity that presents him with financial gain. And it's really, it's blatant now, and you see it with the people with whom he surrounds himself and the kind of behaviors that they exhibit as well. I mean, you look at Rudy Giuliani and the two Floridian men, one from Belarus and one, I think, from I don't know where the other one was from. Maybe he's from Ukraine, actually. I don't recall. But it's an amazing thing. It's all about the money grab.
Saudi Arabia pays cash.
The Saudi Arabia pays cash line, and it can be viewed in the context of so many things.
Yeah.
The cozy relationship we have with MBS now,
right,
that looks the other way on the carving up of this Khashoggi, who was a journalist. And,
right,
when I say look the other way, I mean, you got the world that knows that MBS killed him.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally might have been on the speakerphone as they killed him. He really wanted him dead.
And the way that they have Kushner tiptoeing around Saudi Arabia in this Mideast peace deal, which, of course, we've not heard anything about, is amazing, too, because it shows how precious the money from Saudi Arabia. And we should point out, too, that Donald Trump isn't the first person to do this with Saudi Arabia. The Bush family has done it for a very long time. I would say the Clintons certainly coddled Saudi Arabia at the time. Having an ally in that region, also important. It's not only about the oil that comes out of the ground, but the perpetuation of this and the looking the other way on so much that happens in Saudi Arabia while becoming irate about China is so hypocritical, because it's the same type of human rights violations to some degree in Saudi Arabia, but look the other way because there's money in Saudi Arabia. It's kind of like, when you go into Kuwait to protect Kuwait, right? I mean, yes, I understand why Bush went in, and I respect the way he went in, because he said he wasn't going to do anything else. He wasn't going after Saddam Hussein, and he did, and I'm getting off track here. But
no, he didn't go to Baghdad. You're talking about Bush, the older
Bush the
Bush.
Elder, yeah. And I call him Bush the Elder, not the older Bush. Is that all right with you?
Sorry about that. No.
Like what the older Pliny? So Saudi Arabia has been a place that has been a cash cow for this country, and that's why we're still there.
No question about it. I guess it makes front page. It makes this conversation because we're sending troops there.
Right.
You're right. I mean, there is no question. Everything you just said is true. But and it's funny, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of, here we are like blasting away at Iran about how, Iran's so tough on human rights. They always talk about human rights. They care about human rights when they're ramping up to a war.
Yeah, totally.
But Saudi Arabia makes Iran look like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood when it comes to human rights.
Of course it does. And that's why, when people talk about, clean energy, right, going to solar energy, going to wind energy, the elimination of these complicated international relationships that we have would change the game so much, right? I mean, we wouldn't care as much about Venezuela and human rights there if there weren't oil there, and that may be a bad thing, but the human rights might be better if there weren't people controlling PDVSA and the oil there. You look at Nigeria and Africa. We don't care about Africa because there really isn't much there except Nigeria, and they have the hold on their own oil. So we're totally motivated by that.
Before we leave this Saudi thing, because it is happening, and I think it's the beginning of a thing, I got a tweet today, and it pointed to, we blew it in Iran because we let our guy fall. It was the Shah.
The Shah.
It's true. America, most everybody knows this, but just to reiterate, the Shah was installed by the West, by America, because of, and the British as well, and they got rid of a democratically elected leader, right? Mossadegh?
Yep.
The Shah then was allowed to fall by those who were propping him up, again, the West.
Yeah. And it was, we should point out, it was decades later, too. It wasn't the same people that installed him. I mean, it was, that there was a lapse of time in between.
And there were massive human rights abuses there under the Shah. He was a brutal dictator. So, again, a rich history in this country of supporting brutal dictators.
Yeah.
So now we get to Saudi Arabia, and this guy was saying, so we let the last guy fall. And why is it so bad that we're sending American troops to prop up this guy who is not a formal ally, but as you just suggested, has a relationship over decades with the U.S.?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. I was going to say that the line he draws is perfect. I mean, it's perfectly straight, and that's why.
I would just say this about that: the troops are there supposedly to guard against some kind of military involvement that Iran is going to have with Saudi Arabia.
Right, and there's a fear also of a Saudi Arab Spring some years later too.
That's the real thing, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. You know, I think there's a part of that that's real, and whether it's funded by the Iranians, I don't think necessarily. And I'm not the expert on this. I don't think it's about Iran coming in and invading Saudi Arabia, but it's Iran sponsoring and helping an overthrow of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. And our troops will stop that, apparently.
Well, yeah, and this might be just the initial wave.
Yeah.
Let's get to the president's taxes. You know, he wants to release them, Michael.
Oh,
but
yeah, he does.
They're under audit.
You know,
no one
can
wants
you blame them?
those taxes seen more than Donald Trump does.
No. If only he could do it, they'd be right there tomorrow morning.
That's why he's suing in court to prevent their release.
Right.
And he's suing in virtually in every court
I need to see
them.
this audit through.
Yes. So the latest ruling was from a district court in Washington, literally the District of Columbia court.
Yeah, a 2-to-1 ruling.
Yeah, and the idea is you have to release these taxes to Congress. Congress is going to review them because supposedly Congress needs to look at the taxes as an example of those things that are kind of wrong with the tax code that would permit this, et cetera.
Yeah.
We'll never see Donald Trump's taxes, I don't think.
I suspect we won't, but you know, I think this ruling is important. It would have been nice if it was 3-0. That would have helped. It was Rao, Noemi Rao, who was the appointed judge by Donald Trump. The other two were appointed by Democratic presidents. So it would be nice to see bipartisan rulings somewhere here, right? You know, that it's not that you can just not always point to the quote unquote liberal judges when it comes to this. And I'm partisan here because I think that they need to release these taxes. That I want to know what's in them, and it's a freedom of information type of thing for me. And I also don't believe this audit thing.
Well, of course, the audit thing is total BS. Should we expect the release of taxes, or should we demand the release of taxes? Should we change things so that people like Nancy Pelosi and others have to release their taxes as well?
I think when you're running for president, that you should know as much about that person as possible.
So it's a higher standard, you're saying?
It's a higher standard when you're running for president. I don't think that because you've been in the House of Representatives and your party wants you to be the speaker and vote you in as speaker, you have to be vetted on your taxes, because that could only cause some kind of consternation on each side's part at every single person who's named to that. You know, so I don't think that.
I mean, the swamp that exists in every tax return in everybody's house.
But you can find in everybody's house,
sure,
right?
In everybody's house.
Exactly.
I mean, on both sides.
Right.
I mean, it's So, I think we got to open up the hood on this country, Michael Shure.
I think we do, and I don't think we're getting any closer to it for the moment. But
No.
There may be some hood opening down the road, but it's really it's really got to change. And that's why when you hear Joe Biden say that this period in history could be an aberration, I do identify with that. I think there are a lot of people who agree with that, in that this will not change the way things are done forever in Washington, that this man is an exception to that. It may be sort of pie in the sky of me, but I really do think that there are more people that want to see it go back to how it was, even with all its problems, than live through this kind of tumult again.
Joe Biden sort of represents that, which is let's make America quiet again.
In a sense, that's true. I mean, he's the Gerald Ford here, right? Let's put Watergate to bed. Let's get past the mess, and let me be a caretaker who can move us forward. I think Gerald Ford had a better argument for it than Joe Biden does because of Gerald Ford's relative youth at the time compared to Joe Biden anyway. But I do think that there is some, and not that he died a young man, but he was not. He was in his 60s, not his late 70s. And so I think that we.
And that's the appeal of Joe Biden is just that. He's kind of like he's like the casserole that you can add whatever you want to.
Right.
It's just a basic casserole, though, and no one got excited about Joe Biden. Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, people like him, so he's well liked. So I will say that to that extent, people haven't liked someone out there since Barack Obama, right? They haven't liked Hillary Clinton that much. They haven't liked Donald Trump.
What do they like about Joe Biden, Michael?
They like Joe Biden because he's personable, and he was the Uncle Joe moniker happened for a reason. He can sit and talk to anybody. It's not about issues. It's about the guy who walks in the room, and people do like Joe Biden.
And then to that point, I think that, and I mean to, but I know we only have you for a second more, but I just want to say that I think it is about that. It's a weird, this is the other fact about elections. It's not about issues. I mean, they say it's about issues, but instead it's about a slogan, it's about a feel, it's about a vibe.
Sometimes I agree with you. I think this time it is about, something that is called electability now all of a sudden, and nobody knows how to define it, right? Because how do you know if someone's electable or not? Donald Trump seemed unelectable, and Hillary Clinton seemed very electable. Donald Trump's the president. So is Joe Biden electable? I don't know. I know he has broad appeal in places that Democrats lost last time, but I also know other Democrats have that same appeal. Is he electable because he's been around so much? Name recognition and popularity is important, even if he's not as popular with a now strong and mostly vocal liberal part of or progressive part of the Democratic Party. Yeah, he's still really popular in the Democratic Party right now.
He's slipped behind Elizabeth Warren in national polls.
Yeah, I think that he has slipped. I think that Elizabeth Warren has passed him more than Joe Biden has slipped.
Okay,
and I think that's an important distinction. I don't see that Joe Biden's not exclusively the front runner now. I have to argue that Elizabeth Warren, according to the polls, is by a little bit. But you haven't seen a diminishment in Joe Biden as much as you've seen other people rise and fall, and now you've seen a consistent rise from Elizabeth Warren. But, that's going to put her under greater scrutiny, too.
And don't we have to really pay attention to just a handful of states and a handful of districts? I mean, the election did come down to a critical area.
Yeah, and I would say a handful of demographics, because when you look at, yes, it came down to important areas, but you are trying still to get union workers in states that you won to come out for you, because if they don't, then states, if you're the Democratic Party, you say, we won this state, right? Let's take, I don't know, Colorado. We don't want to alienate those people. We still want to boost them up, and by boosting them up, we are also boosting in the states that are more vital to us this time. And you see the president's fear of this, too. You see him doing his rallies in a place like Minnesota. They know that they're not just going to get Michigan and Pennsylvania. So they looked at the map and they say, well, where are we going to go? Oh, we're going to do a rally in New Mexico. We're going to do one in Minnesota. Those are states we didn't get slaughtered in, but we didn't win. Maybe we have a shot.
He has let down that working class American that he made promises to.
You would think, yes. I mean, objectively,
factories have closed.
Objectively, yes. But he is also
objectively, yes,
right.
Okay.
But they are people too who are not given to supporting the always the liberals, the PC, exactly. And they're not a monolith anymore, right? When the leader, when your shop steward or your union leader in that local said, we are going out and we're supporting, even as recent as John Kerry, you just went along. Now there's a lot more individuality about it, and there's a lot more revolt within the unions to what the leadership does, a lot of separation. And I think that that's reflective in the way that they've separated out their endorsements. SEIU does it differently than the firefighters, who do it differently than the culinary workers, who do it differently than the Teamsters and the auto workers. So we'll see. I mean, I'm going to next week to the strike, see the striking GM workers in Ohio, and talk with them a little bit about what's on their mind. Many of them voted for Trump, and a lot of them are the ones that you were just mentioning, who they were let down. Right, their plants are closed, they're out of work, car jobs are moving elsewhere, and yet they were people that left the Democratic Party or over the last two cycles or just the last cycle. Do they go back? What do they think of their vote? And would they do it all over again?
Wow. Michael, how do people watch all these different shows that they say they watch on a Hulu and Netflix and HBO? And I can't. It's crazy.
No. I don't. I watch sports and I watch politics.
You've seen billions in
right.
Mrs. Maisel. It's like, it's wild.
Ridiculous. Yeah, it's
and I got to get my sports in.
Well, that's the thing.
I got to watch things that I can wager on.
And you can't bet on the fabulous Mrs. Maisel.
Thank you, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Marvelous, see? Marvelous.
Yes. Michael, I wish we had more time with you.
Well, I love the time we have, and I'm always happy to be here. Yeah.
And we're so grateful for you making time. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Michael Shaw!
Thank you. Thanks. We'll see you guys again soon, all right? We'll talk after the debate.
I want to thank you for supporting Mark Thompson here on the Edge Radio. Fantastic show with all the jokes and J Elvis, and all the commentary and the politics and the bullshit. I love it. Edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is that dash? Edge-show.com.
J Elvis, you put out a comedy album.
I did.
Is this your first comedy album?
It is. It took me 32 years in comedy to do it, but yes, it is.
I'm going to play a little bit of it.
There was one time in my life I felt brave for an extended period. It was the best job I ever had, in fact. It was when I was 15 years old, oddly enough. Had a job at a haunted house called Ghost Manor, and my job was playing Chainsaw Guy. That was my role. That was my training, essentially. I went in, they gave me a hockey mask and a chainsaw, and said, "You're Chainsaw Guy." I said, "So I'm like Jason from Friday the 13th? He went, "No, you're Chainsaw Guy. We're going to get sued." All right. Yeah, I'm sure they're looking at Ghost Manor. So I was like, "So what do I say? Do I say anything?" He's like, "No, you don't talk. You never talk." I'm like, "All right, well, Jason doesn't talk, but all right." And he goes, "Your job is to rev the chainsaw whenever anyone comes around that corner." Great job. It's a great job. Because the startle rate of when you come around the corner, 100%. Everyone's scared. It's great. You don't get that kind of feedback at a job usually. And then there's it's followed usually by about an 80% anger rate. Like, "Hey, you just waved a chainsaw at me," that kind of anger. And then there's like a 10 to 15% just super pissed off, irate. Usually dudes like, "Dude, what the hell's wrong with you? You almost killed my girlfriend." And and there wasn't a chain in the chainsaw, but I couldn't tell them that. I couldn't speak, so I just go, "I'm gonna kick your ass, dude." And I go, As the month got on, I actually got more expressive. I could laugh at them. If I made a kid cry, I could be... But these dudes would threaten me on a regular basis, and I was never scared. Never scared, because I had a chainsaw.
That's got to be kind of exciting to be able to pull together enough for an album.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
And that bit you just played was actually, even though the oldest story in my act, it was the newest bit. I had never before that week put it last in my act, but it tied everything up well with that.
But you had done that through the years, hadn't you?
No, I just started. That's the newest. That's less than a year old, that bit.
You were a chainsaw guy in this place as a kid, ish, I don't know.
Yeah.
And yet it survived all the different venues that you've done comedy
Yeah,
without
for some
ever
reason,
being a
I never
bit.
thought of telling the story until I was on stage once last year, and then it became a bit.
God, it just seems so right. It's a great story, I think. It's so funny. You know what I mean? You really did great stuff with it. But you talk about your cancer.
Yeah.
That's really fun. You talk about a bunch of stuff that's really funny. You talk about, you got stuff on animals and taxes and, you do your jury thing. People who are regulars of this, regular listeners of this podcast will even know that J Elvis.
A lot of that material made it into my story here on the podcast.
Yeah, it was good. We had a talk, Josh served on a murder trial, murder jury.
Yes.
And if you haven't heard that story, you should go back and listen to that episode, which is at edge-show.com. If you're listening on iTunes or whatever, you can try putting it in with murder or jury, and maybe you'll come up that way. But it's definitely on the website, edge-show.com. And Josh served on 2 murder juries, as I recall, right?
No, 1 murder jury, but for like 5 juries.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, okay. So, yeah, because you discuss other cases as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, in our podcast I'm talking about. But that was cool that made it in. I like that, too.
Thank you. It's called the jury chunk.
Yeah.
So each bit is referred to as the chunk. That last one was the chainsaw chunk. We're talking about the jury chunk. That's why the album is, in fact, called Chunks.
Let me play one other chunk, can I?
Sure.
I just don't want to kill your album sales.
I love me.
Here we go.
Best headline ever I just saw this week. You might have seen it yourself. Rhino poacher killed by elephants, eaten by lions. Fan-goddamn-tastic. I didn't read the article because it might have ruined it because it was just so perfect. I get bummed out when headlines fool me, though, because you can't just read the headlines because they don't even match up with the stories anymore. It's like someone writes an article, someone else writes a headline. Sometimes they've never met or spoken, and you can tell. I got fooled into one a couple of months ago this past winter when, here's the headline. 97-year-old twins leave the world the same way they came in, together. What? Yes. Sounds like a medical miracle, doesn't it? It sounds like, oh my God, these twins, they were so genetically similar, they have the same amount of heartbeats, or one of them sent out their secret twin signal before she died. I'm going, okay. None of that was the case. It wasn't a medical miracle. These two women, 97-year-old sisters, went out to dinner on this particular night, cold night in Ohio. They come back to their house, drove themselves late at night. Well, maybe not late at night, probably 6. but after dinner. One of them slips on the ice. She falls. She can't get up. In fact, she may have said something to that effect. Her sister decides to go for help. She gets out of the car. She slips on the ice. She falls. She can't get up. And they both freeze to death on the driveway. Yeah, just like they came into the world. What the hell? As if one of them was lying there, you know what this reminds me of, Gladys? That time we were born. And they interviewed people, you know, people who knew the sisters and family members, and it's like everyone they interviewed was just so enthralled by the fact that twins died at the same time. It's like they only read the headline, too. One of the daughters says, well, it was meant to be. Well, I guess as soon as you decided you didn't need to get them a life alert, just needed one. You didn't even need to get 2 of them. Another relative said, well, I can't imagine how one would have gotten along without the other. And I'm thinking, yeah, because they were clearly such an effective team. Sometimes the headlines are underwritten, and you almost skip over something amazing. I saw one that just said, pastor dies during service. I thought, well, that probably happens. And the only thing that kept me around was that it was Waco, Texas. I was like, all right, I'm in. So here's what happened. It was Sunday morning in this church in Waco, Texas. Baptist church. Pastor's about to do some baptizing, and he's standing in the water, waist deep in the jacuzzi. I don't know. We'll go with that. Standing waist deep in the jacuzzi. And he reaches over to grab what turned out to be a very poorly grounded microphone. Yeah. Spark! Splash! Dead. Zaptized, if you will. Which would have made a much better headline, don't you think? But really what the headline should have been is this: miracle occurs in Texas. Think about it. When's the last time anyone went into a Southern Baptist church and got a science lesson?
Oh! It's a thinker, too, at the end.
That's kind of my favorite joke still, I think.
It's a thinker. I love that whole chunk.
Thank you.
I love the twins thing. And then I love the zaptized, which really should have been the headline, is a really funny line.
I'm cheerfully dark, is how I guess I have to describe my act. There's a body count in my act, but you don't sense it.
No, you're right. Somehow you lose the carnage in the laughs, right, which is very nice. So you get it on iTunes.
iTunes or Pandora, anywhere stuff streams, anywhere you buy stuff.
I bought it twice.
Thank you.
I don't know why.
I don't know why either.
It's probably a mistake, but it's showing up everywhere now.
Some drunken guilt
do you want to
purchase.
Download Chunks? You've purchased it. No, I just meant really. I meant really just to send Elvis the money. Yeah. Anyway, very, very cool. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, sir.
It's just one of the things that you do. You know, you're one of these guys who is so prolific in so many ways. As people who are regular listeners to the show know, you're a documentary filmmaker.
Yes.
And your films, I wonder if you could review sort of the state of the state on your films, the documentaries, what they are and where they can be seen or where they will be seen.
I have one that's out on Amazon Prime right now called I Need You to Kill, which is about the sort of emerging stand-up scene in Asia right now, as seen through the eyes of 3 American comics on tour with Tom Segura, Chad Daniels, Pete Lee, 3 really funny dudes. And then you really get to see what's happening in these comedy scenes that are in their nascent stages in Hong Kong and Singapore and Macau.
And they tell you can't make references to this thing, or you can't talk about that.
There's
thing.
some of that, more in Singapore than Hong Kong, but if you do stand up on the mainland, it's always about the 3 T's apparently, which is Tiananmen, Taiwan, and Tibet. Those are the 3 taboo subjects. Because
you go with these people that you talk about, these other comics, there's a dynamic between the comics too.
Yeah, I really wanted, because I'm a comic, I wanted to, I didn't want it to be a, like, this is what comedy's like on the road kind of doc. I really wanted people to be able to feel what it's like on the road and what the good and bad of hanging with comics is, and the
what's the bad of hanging with comics?
The bad is if you have a thin skin, you're a dead man.
What does that mean?
Meaning that comics will harsh on each other all day long in the interest of being funny.
I see.
But there are some comics who are good dishers, not such good takers, and that wasn't really the case on this trip. But there's times where not every week is summer camp when you're on the road. Sometimes you get paired with people who you really don't want to hang with.
You've been doing comedy since you were 17?
15.
15.
Yeah.
And
started going on the road when I was 16.
And your folks were cool with it?
Sort of. They allowed it to happen.
They certainly knew you loved it. Right?
I had booked, my first time I went on the road was during spring break from high school, and it was like all bars in the Dakotas. And convincing my Jewish mother that was a really good idea for me at 16 was difficult. And it was really purely my father, who was still alive at the time, going, well, the kid had the wherewithal to book these gigs.
Yeah.
We should let him do them. So.
That's a great point. I mean, you obviously wanted it so badly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't stage parents. They were just like, I don't know what he's doing, but all right, he seems happy.
The other thing about you is the stand-up has been a through line for your career.
It is a through line because it's just kind of how I self-identify. Even when I'm directing a movie, I feel like I'm a comic directing a movie.
I used to introduce Josh sort of like in a nutshell with like credits, like Josh is a documentary filmmaker and a this and a that. And Josh said to me one day, you can just say I'm a comic. You don't have to like say I'm all of these things.
Yeah, that's the truest. That feels the truest to me.
But to me, and I think what I told you at that time was, well, it's not just for you. I'm telling the audience and people who are tuning in and also the guest, hey, this guy has done all of these things. I don't want it to be your resume, but I'd like them to know that you have a breadth of, if not expertise, of experience,
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that's what I'm proudest of, the variety of my career. I have a real sort of pathological resistance to routine.
Right.
And it gets me depressed after a while. And so I wrote television for many years, but it had that same grind of school for me a lot of the time. Unless it was a show that I was genuinely passionate about doing, it gets hard for me to psychologically just keep doing the same thing every day. So
you were involved with one of the, I don't know how I should call, whether I was going to say seminal, but I feel like that's an overused word, but I think one of the best known and most lauded shows, I think, in primetime history, and that's Freaks and Geeks.
Yeah, that was that was one of those years where you're like, I am glad to be here,
Yeah, right.
But that was such an atmosphere of everyone caring,
That was a Judd Apatow show, just to remind everybody.
Yeah, Judd Apatow and Paul Feig created it.
And Paul Feig and Judd Apatow have gone on to some pretty big things also, right?
Yeah, Paul Feig was the first person I met in Los Angeles.
I remember you saying that once. I just saw a big headline on him. He's doing some movie or something soon.
Yeah, I think just signed
some big deal.
It's like a Christmassy thing or something, or a holiday thing. But he was the first person I met. I moved here when I was 20, and he was friends of my friend Jeff Cesario, and we went out to dinner, and he was a fan of Mystery Science Theater. He was like the super nice guy who also knew who I was from Mystery Science Theater. So I was like, all right, LA is going to be great. Everyone's going to be nice and know who I am. And he was like the last guy for like 2 years. So.
And then you went on as a head writer. on America's Funniest Home Videos.
I did. I'd been my first Writers Guild Network gig was later with Greg Kinnear, and I became head. I was a staff writer, and then I became the head writer the second year. And then I did a sitcom, and then I went to America's Funniest Home Videos with a lot of reluctance.
Because you felt it was too cheesy?
I felt it was too cheesy, and I told them that. Because they had sort of brought me in to desagatize the show. Yeah. I had John Fugelsang and Daisy Fuentes were the hosts when I was head writer.
Right.
So I kind of went in there with an attitude of like, my friends like the show, but they watch it muted, Just
wow.
The videos are good, but everything else I'd love to change. And they're like, all right, go ahead.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, Greg Kinnear, he's a talented actor, huh?
He is. I think he's had to grow into it, but he is a talented guy.
I feel like Mystery Science Theater 3000 is just one of those magnificent moments and thoughts and experiences as a viewer, I'm talking about. Like when I first found that show, and it was early on, because I remember it was called it wasn't called the Comedy Central then.
It was called Comedy Channel originally.
Yeah, Comedy Channel. Okay, that was it. And I just thought, wow, this show is great. I remember watching it during the day. Back then I was like, I'd go out and stay out late at night, and I'd wake up late because I didn't have to be on the television newscast till that night. And I'd watch it during the day, and I just thought it was the greatest. How did that come to you, and what was the experience like?
It was a widely varied experience, but initially it was Joel Hodgson, who I had taken a class from when I was 15 and just started doing stand-up, and then we became friends, and we were in a writing group with other comics together and stuff. And one day after that writing group, which was at a library conference room in Minneapolis, he asked me and Trace Beaulieu, hey, I'm doing this thing at a UHF station tomorrow. There's some puppets and stuff. Do you want to come help? We're like, sure. Yeah, of course. And so the next day, we went in and there was these crudely built robot puppets, and Trace chose the one that kind of looked like a bird, and I chose the sort of gumball machine-y one. And originally that one was actually, the one that I chose was called Beeper. And it had a different head. It had a fishbowl head, and he only beeped like R2-D2, which I immediately was like, nah, let's not do that, because it's hard to get jokes out like that.
That seems ill-conceived, right?
And so he switched the head and gave me this puppet with the gumball head and said, figure out a character. And I came up with Tom Servo, who was there's Tom Servo with the mighty voice, and sort of like really an AM radio character. It was kind of what I was going for. And we started making the show, and the initial concept of the show was to sort of, take these local hosted movies that were, ubiquitous throughout the United States on local, these Saturday afternoon movies. And as the host, not only do you go to these, the bumpers between commercials and stuff, but you actually go and watch the movie with the people, be a good host, essentially. And so it started out with very sparse comments. There'd be like trivia facts and occasional jokes, and they were all improvised. And then week by week, we would start adding jokes. And then as you added jokes, you started feeling the absence of jokes. So you had to add more jokes, And so, we did the show on this UHF station. We did 22 or 20 episodes, I think, on this KTMA in Minneapolis.
Was the sci-fi part of it, there's this construct of them being in space, and was that built in yet or not so much?
That was built in. It was always this guy. Initially, he was sort of a pirate radio guy.
Okay.
In the pilot we had made, but then we came up with the thing of he was shot into space by these evil scientists and forced to watch these movies.
Okay.
And he built these robots to keep him company, essentially. Largely, that framework was based on the Silent Running Bruce Dern movie.
Sure.
I
remember seeing that when I was a kid, Silent Running, and really was affected by it.
Yeah.
I don't know why that movie cut through to me as a kid. I saw it on TV.
Yeah, but it is a kid kind of movie. It's like, especially, the kid with imaginary friends almost who builds his own friends if he's alone.
And at the end of the film, as I recall, Bruce Dern toward the end is like running in that like an automatic car. It was like a go-kart type thing. That's because the thing is so vast. They're building their own. It's its own biosphere. So he's got stuff on board so it can sustain it in deep space.
Right.
And then he's
A lot of kid fantasy there.
Right. And he's screaming around the corner, and he hits one of his robot friends.
Right.
And kills it. And I remember being, as a kid, like really affected by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so funny. I hadn't thought of silent running in years, but really cool. Anyway, go ahead.
So that happened to be when Comedy Channel was coming online, and we knew someone at Comedy Channel. So these guys put together a reel of our best stuff from that 20 episodes and gave it to them. And, I think that reel really informed us what the show would become, because it was jam-packed with all of our best jokes, And so we realized at that point, all right, once this is real, we can't improvise it anymore. We have to start writing jokes and really packing it,
And when you were actually doing that show, you're just recording the lines wild, right?
No, you're puppeteering and watching the movie in actual real time, yeah.
God, that's wild.
And so we would actually, when we did it as a local show, the entire production process was a 24-hour cycle. We would come in on Thursday afternoon, look through the TV station's movie library for the dregs of it, find a movie, watch maybe 10 minutes about it, go, that'll work. And then we'd leave. And then we'd come in the next morning at about 8:30 on Friday. We'd spend about an hour writing the 5 host segments, where Joel and the robots talk to each other and the evil scientists do their thing. And then we'd go shoot those. And then we'd go to lunch. And then we'd come back and we'd start shooting each movie segment. And they would literally be editing the show as we shot it. They would be onlining the show. So they'd edit in that movie segment, put in a host segment we shot that morning. Then we'd shoot the next movie segment.
Wow.
Because we had to be out of the studio by 5 because a wrestling show came in after us.
Wow, that's great.
So the entire production process on each episode back then was literally 24 hours.
Wow, that's just wild.
So when I came to LA, that had been my background of like, it takes
cranking jokes,
and it takes 7 guys to make a TV show,
right.
And that just, when I got out here to Unionville and did, was on a talk show that took a staff of 100, you go, wow, this is, I had to figure out what was real and what wasn't, kind of about production,
Yeah.
And I certainly like the large union crew. That's a great luxury, but it also made me keenly aware that you could do things with very small crews, which I tend to do on my own projects.
Mystery Science Theater, I'll get back to the documentaries too in a second, but Mystery Science Theater became a big hit, didn't it?
It became, I guess you'd say, a cult hit.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, multiple seasons on Comedy Central, right?
I think 10 seasons total. It was 7 on Comedy Central and then 3 on Sci-Fi Network.
And then it's had.
And I left after the first. So
yeah, and you left because
I left because I got screwed out of a piece of the show that everyone else got, but they decided since I was 17 or 18 that they didn't need to give me one.
Wow.
And it ended up causing tension that I couldn't get fully past, and
right.
I think part of it was that I was a precocious, kind of know-it-all 18-year-old, and that's not an attractive thing to people,
But isn't
the teenager who thinks he knows everything isn't that fun to hang with, I think. So, had I been fully beloved by them, it probably would have been a different scene. But but because I felt screwed, and then I sort of felt this sort of internal agenda to keep me down, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
I was like, this just isn't the place for me. So
that's wild.
It didn't end well, but I then
later you reconnected with
these are all
everybody.
my friends still, and it was 30 years ago, so we've since reconnected. We did a thing called Cinematic Titanic, and
yeah, that was essentially the same thing, right? Yeah, that's really cool. Where you go to their movie showing and you guys are making jokes about the movie.
Yeah, and for me it was much more fun. It was a much better. I was a man and I had my full complement of skills, and I ended up sort of being the producer of that show because I could do all the post-production with an editor and do all the,
How great would it have been if they fucked you out of that money too, though? That would have been great. Huh?
Well, and I kind of said at the time I wouldn't work for Joel Hodgson again, but I will work with him.
Sure. I want to get back to the documentaries for a second because you mentioned I Need You to Kill, which is the comics touring in Asia.
Yes.
But you did another documentary.
I did, which I'm in audio sessions this week finishing up once again.
Now, let me ask you something, because I saw that documentary a couple of years ago, and it's really good. And it's timeless. I mean, you can watch it, you can drop it this year or next year, it doesn't matter. But I wondered when you say that, well, wasn't the film I saw a couple years ago, isn't that the movie you're doing? Or when you say
It
I'm
is,
an audio,
it's the same movie.
are
With,
you remixing it or what are you doing?
There were, there's
Clearance issues?
Yeah, it was all clearance stuff. So
That's about music and
there's 30 pieces of music or whatever. And Michael had this. The movie's called Michael DeBar. Who Do You Want Me to Be? And we actually did an episode about it with Michael a few years ago here on Ed Show. You can look up.
And he's a charming guy. I mean, by now you've lived with him for like a lifetime, so I don't know how, maybe the charm's worn off, but he's very, very charming with this experience of a life that's just remarkable.
Yeah, I think it's a great story, and I've been sort of, I've had such a long relationship with this movie that, I'm back to being happy about it again, but there was several years where it had just become this albatross in my life because of all these, it was my first doc and I financed it. And, there was mistakes I made in terms of like, oh, this will be fine. It's a documentary, and people getting bad advice from people, but taking it because it was the advice I wanted to hear.
I see.
I know so much more now. But so, I took this out a few years ago to festivals and I won a Best in Show with it. And then, I talked to the wrong music clearance people who told me it was going to be these hundreds of thousands of dollars to clear this music. And so I sort of like had to start looking for money from other people. And then I'd stopped doing that. And then I found a music supervisor guy who was like this old music manager who's been in the business for 40 years, and he was willing to just call these people and just berate the hell out of them until they gave me an answer and a price, Because part of the problem was you just don't get answers from people. If you're this low-budget thing, they don't care. But he was willing, and the first music clearance people I got were willing to call once a month or, just checking in, And I'm not fighting for a good price for you.
Right. You need more of somebody who's really dogged.
So I found this guy who made it affordable for me.
Yeah.
Who berated people into great deals, going, you know what, take the money. This isn't going to make anything. Just take the money. Right. And he wasn't wrong. He wasn't lying to them. It's not going to make any money.
Sure.
I'm not going to recoup my money on this.
It's a beautiful film too. I have to say, it's shot so well. It's hard to believe that was your first full-length documentary.
Yeah, I was. I'm back to proud of it again.
Yeah,
you should be. It's having watched it, uninterruptedly this past week in a way that I sort of had only been jumping around the last couple of years. I'm like, oh yeah, that's some good storytelling. Good job, Josh.
Yeah. And then we touched on this in a prior episode, but just to tie it all up, you are an actor in a film with Andy Kindler that I think is being released now.
It's coming out. It's premiering at the Chelsea Film Festival in October.
Wow, look at you, a Chelsea Film.
And you said you're an actor, and I don't know.
We'll find out.
It was that,
They didn't cut you out.
They didn't cut me out because I'm a lead role in the movie.
Yeah.
They needed me. I'm on most every page. And it was a bizarre happenstance that I got this movie. And but we were talking about my weird, bizarre, all over the place career. It was like, to me, the fact that I have a life in which that could happen, where a director calls you up and offers you a lead role in a movie, was very life affirming. Just this whole, it's like, whatever it is that I'm doing, if this can still happen,
right,
and something that can make me excited after 30 some years, and something that can make me go, you shouldn't be doing this, but you're doing it, that was very exciting. That was the most exciting part of it.
It's really,
that could happen.
It's not easy either to do these, to act, I don't think. I used to think it was really easy. I don't think it is anymore.
No. It was funny because I've really found myself coming at it like a writer, because every writer thinks he's an actor in his head, because you have to sort of be, because you have to hear it,
Right.
But I found myself looking at each scene going, what do I need this character to do in this scene? It was really a writer agenda that I was approaching acting with. Like, what would the writer need me to pull off in this scene,
That's a very cool perspective to bring to it.
Yeah, it was, it was safer than me trying it as an actor, which I'm not an experienced actor. I've done stuff, but I'm not an actor. What was weird is he initially had asked me to do a cameo role, which I felt actually, in hindsight, way less suited for that 2-page cameo role and that character than the one I ended up playing.
Just because you felt that the character he wanted you for was not the right one for you?
Well, it was the way that came about is he had written a major part for Andy Kindler, who's my partner on Thought Spiral, our podcast, and one of a 30-year friend. And the director was a fan of Thought Spiral, so I just wrote him and go, hey, give me a one-day cameo or something. I'll come down. We'll do Thought Spiral episode from the set. It'll be fun. It'll just be a fun hang. And I would get to do a scene in a movie, which I've always wanted to do, So he gave me this role, which ended up being played by David Hayden Jones, who's the actor who plays Aaron Rodgers' agent in those State Farm commercials that are very heavily played this season in football.
Yeah.
And he was great in it. But Smarmy Dick isn't my, I would have had to find a weird way to get to a convincing version of Smarmy Dick in terms of what the script was calling for. So I was like, I was going to do it, but I'm like, and then when he called me and his actor had dropped out and he asked me to do the lead, I was very hesitant. And then when I read it, I was like, oh no, that I can actually do.
Yeah, you felt like less of a stretch.
Yes.
Well, I can't wait to see it. And so Chelsea Film Festival and then beyond.
October 19th in New York.
We'll get into a wide release.
Probably not. But a release.
Some kind of release,
yeah.
maybe?
Yeah, it'll get a release.
I'm struck as you tell the story about how you got this role. That Thought Spiral is a real thing for you. I know you guys are making a fortune on that podcast, the Joe Rogan kind of money.
Oh, yeah. Tens and tens of dollars.
It's the Thought Spiral with Andy Kindler.
And J Elvis
Weinstein. The album, again, is called Chunks. J Elvis Weinstein with a bunch of chunks of very funny stuff. And then we'll watch for all the other things. And I feel as though you have a bright future on this show. And
Excellent.
I don't think that should be understated.
No.
I mean, I oftentimes spend a lot of time with these other projects you're involved in. I feel maybe I've neglected that you're a critical part of this project.
Why, thank you, Mark.
All right.
It's a pleasure to be here for whatever reason I do. But I appreciate the infomercial episode.
Yeah, always fun to visit with you. Thank you, J Elvis Weinstein.
Thank you, Mark Thompson.
Get more of The Edge on Stitcher and iTunes, or go to our website, edge-show.com.
Oh, okay. Let me just, It's just something. There we go. Yeah. I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, shit, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?